He's texting while driving.
All right, we're recording. This is, I think, episode 44, I believe, of Just This. Richard Rohr. We're going to be starting on page 64, picking up where we left off last week on totally intimate and totally ultimate. I don't know if there's anything. Last week, Tony had some leftover questions from the session before. Does anybody have anything left over from last week? Anything, or I mean, we're going to start there. So, but was there anything that was not fully developed that you were thinking about that you want to bring up before we dive into it?
Nope.
Okay, looks like we're cleared for takeoff. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and reread Totally Intimate and Totally Ultimate, but then we'll pick it up halfway through the page because that's where we left off. So when you move to non-dual thinking, God is no longer out there, but not just in here either. For the great mystics of all religions, God is always experienced as abiding in their own soul and in seeming contradiction as totally transcendent and mysterious to them at the same time. God is both intimate and ultimate. When you know that you are a living tabernacle of the great transcendence, the gap is forever overcome in your very existence. You gain a tremendous respect for yourself, while you also know that this is a totally free gift from God. You feel deep peace and contentment, an ultimate sense of being at home. To be an atheist is, frankly, never to have experienced this. Presence is full body experience, not just an idea in the mind. The mind can only reprocess the past, judge the present, and worry about the future. The reason that practical atheism and common agnosticism have emerged so broadly today is that we no longer teach people how to be present. When you do not know how to be present, you cannot access the real presence, especially not in here, nor out there either. Okay, so we spent a lot of time, we were actually talking about this idea of, from the last, from page 63, God is always and forever the subject. God is always and forever the subject, not an object. We can't point to him out there, draw edges around God, handles to hold on to, and ways to actually think about God that can be in any way accurate, right? So God is forever the subject, knowing in you, through you, with you, and yes, as you. And that's kind of where Tony was coming from. He wanted to know what is that all about, especially the as you part. And then we move over to, when you move to non-dual thinking, God is no longer out there, but not just in here either. So he's connecting those two thoughts and he's further developing it. So God isn't a subject that we can look at, point to, and observe from a distance. When we are really present to God, God is through us. It's like we're swimming in God. We're breathing God. God can't get any closer because we are of his stuff, if you want to look at it that way. He created us. Genesis says he created us out of his breath, right? He formed Adam out of the clay, but he breathed into his nostrils this nefesh hayah, this living beingness. And so that's the stuff of us, if you want to look at it that metaphorically. So when we are present to God, there's no distinction. It's just all one thing. That's why it's when you move to non-dual thinking, because as long as we can look at something as an object, we're thinking dualistically. There is this and there is that. But when we move into pure presence, it's all one thing. So he's not out there and he's not just in here either. He's everywhere, all at once, every when and everywhere. It's all one thing. And so God has always experienced as abiding in their own soul and in seeming contradiction, totally transcendent at the same time, unknowable, mysterious, and yet as close as the next breath. So God is both intimate and ultimate. Nice play on words there. So when you know that you are a living tabernacle of the great transcendence, okay, you are the place in which this great transcendence actually resides. And he's taking that from Paul, right? We're all living tabernacles. We're living temples of God. The gap is forever overcome in our very existence. The gap between what? Between the intimate and the ultimate, between the out there and the in here. That's all resolved in us, in our experience in that moment of complete presence. When we step outside of the egoic mind, that is what has the capacity to objectify, then we no longer have the capacity to objectify. See how that works? It's our minds that keep us separated from everything else. Step outside of that consciousness, and now we're one with everything. The way the animals in the forest are one with their surroundings, the way a very small child is one with their parents, with their mother. The very small child, the infant, doesn't see the difference between the face in front and who they are. It's all one thing. So that's that Edenic experience in the Garden of Eden, where you walk with God in the cool of the evening and you don't know you're naked. That's that experience. We can move back into that when we step away from that which can objectify. And then, interesting line here, you gain a tremendous respect for yourself, while you also know that this is a totally free gift from God. So when we so often talk about that we have to love ourselves before we can love anyone else, when we talk about how we want to forgive others, but we have such a hard time forgiving ourselves, when we talk about having such a harsh internal critic, and we just are constantly criticizing ourselves. When you can experience the fact that this God, this transcendent God, the Alpha and the Omega, who created the heavens and the earth, actually resides in you, is part of you, and you are part of God, how in the world does that harsh inner critic keep criticizing? You see where he's going with this? It's gonna take the whole thing and flip it around. Once again, it's the egoic mind that tells us all these horrible things about ourselves. That we're not good enough, we're not worthy, that nobody loves us, no one's going to care about us. If they really knew who we were, they would run screaming from the room. God couldn't possibly approve of me. All of that is residing in the egoic mind, and as a result of all the hurts that we've ever experienced from our own Edenic experience as a child. But when we break through all that, when we finally come face to face and presence to presence, we gain a tremendous respect for ourselves, even though we realize that we didn't do anything to earn it. We didn't do anything to create it. It's there for us. It's this totally free gift. You feel a deep peace and contentment and ultimate sense of being at home. And to be an atheist is frankly never to experience this. Okay, did a lot of talking there. Reactions, thoughts. How is this hitting you?
That's what I was trying to get across last week. That last line, you feel a deep present peace and contentment, an ultimate sense of being at home. And that's what I felt at Sarah retreat. Dave corrected me that I was saying it wrong. At Sarah retreat, is I did feel that peace and that contentment and felt at home. Just being there and just setting myself aside and finding a bench and sitting on the bench and getting quiet. And I hadn't read this yet, but when I read this, it was like, oh, that's what I experienced. And that was a wonderful contentment and peace. It was, and as I like to say, Ellen and I like to say, I think, Mother Mary was there too. She was with me. She was with me also. I was in front of her statue. But what I also like about this is that it's totally free. I didn't know that for years. I didn't know that God loved me and it was free and I didn't have to earn it and I didn't have to seek his approval. I mean, I was seeking everybody else's approval, but I didn't have to seek God's approval. And I eventually learned to call myself, and I still do, a beloved child of God. And I believe that with every inch of my fiber, that I am his beloved child and that he loves me unconditionally. So this paragraph is really profound for me. And then when it says about the atheist never experiencing this, I feel so sad for for the people that have not experienced this. How very, very sad. So anyway, this paragraph is just, I don't know. I don't even know what words I want to say, but it's meant a lot to me, this particular paragraph.
I go back to at other times, Dave, it's been somewhere that you've talked about God having no edges, and something you mentioned out of the fifth way back in the day when you were doing Wednesday night book studies and we were reading excerpts out of your fifth way. But ever since then, these words have rang with me, that there's stars beneath your feet. And the visualization of there's stars beneath my feet, when I feel, at that time I was thinking God's embrace, it's not only around me, but it's underneath me and above me and behind me. And now I look at it in the awareness of a presence, like I don't even know how to explain it, but it's like I'm, as you said, living, swimming, breathing, everything I do, driving, walking around, everything I'm doing in this soup that is God. I don't enter it. I don't reach out my hands for it. I live my everyday life immersed in it. I choose to acknowledge my presence when I'm aware that I've stopped and recognized that. But no longer do I feel any kind of need to seek God in my life. It's just automatically there. And the value that has, and the deep peace and contentment and ultimate sense of being at home that provides, talking about being at home, that's every ounce of me is being at home in that presence. Yeah, so that's what I get out of that.
Yeah. Hey, Sharon, I loved your the soup called God.
I don't know how else to explain it.
No, because then when you said that, then I was picturing myself as an ingredient. I did a visual in that
Driving
soup.
around, around the parsley. Yeah.
Yeah, it just connected me with everything and everyone and God in that soup, because I love soup and I love making it and eating it, and it's like, wow, yeah, all those flavors just come together. And so using that soup, I thought that was a great picture for me. Thank you.
That's why it's so great when everybody shares like this, because everyone is going to come up with different imagery to try to say the same thing, whether it's stars beneath your feet or whether it's you're in the soup, it's the same thing that we're trying to get across, but we can't say it directly. If we do say it directly, it's just words, but metaphor can take us into an experience. It can recall an experience, like for you, Tony, how the soup did. And
Yeah,
so
no,
this is why getting I mean, think about what Jesus did. The kingdom of heaven is like this. The kingdom of heaven is like that. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. It's like a woman who lost a coin in her home, over and over, image after image, because he never knows when this light bulb is going to go on over somebody's head, you know. And I remember that teaching school when I was teaching middle school. I'd lay out a concept and I could tell the kids weren't getting it. Try it a different way. The brightest kids, the usual suspects, they would get it. You'd see the change in their face, the light bulb would go on. And I tried to say it as many times as I could to get as much of the class with me before I had to move on, you know. But you see Jesus doing the exact same thing. That's what we get to do in here. You know, Richard is giving us as many images as he can. I'm paraphrasing what he says and giving you more, but then you all give more, and you never know which one is going to hit. So soup works for Tony, great. But see if you can start to, picture what that presence. To say that an atheist has never experienced this is not entirely true, because everyone has experienced this. But what everyone has not done is put 2 and 2 together and come up with 4. Because we've all experienced these moments of pure presence, because sometimes the experiences of life are just intense enough that it blows everything else out. You know, and we talked about those moments, those sunset moments, those baby on your chest moments, those extreme sports moments when everything is just so crystalline and you feel alive and everything makes sense for that moment. But if you don't put that together, then you're going to lose it in the next moment. And even though Jerry says she had this great experience at Sarah Retreat, and Sarah is a great place to have those kind of experiences. It's set up beautifully for that, and the physical beauty of the place, and the way that they keep it quiet, and so on and so forth, and the benches that they have that just are. So it's easier to have an experience there. And she comes away saying, yeah, now I know I'm a child of God. But to say I'm a child of God or beloved of God, that God loves me, are just words that mean absolutely nothing again until we plug back in to presence. And so just like I've used the image before, how long will this lamp stay lit if I pull it out of the wall, pull the plug out of the wall? We have to keep coming back to the experience of presence, not just thinking about the experience that we once had. It's essential that we stay plugged in day by day, every day. We keep coming back to that experience. We keep having those experiences, because that's what's going to eventually convince us of something. And that's as close to certainty as we humans ever get, is just the conviction. But you stay unplugged long enough and you will start to question it, because now you're only looking at it objectively in your mind, and now you're separated from it again. So it's important for us to practice presence, as Brother Lawrence would say, every single day with everything we do.
I do it with my kitty cats.
Great. That's it.
Carol, I'm going to put you on the spot, if you don't mind.
What?
You shared, Carol.
Oh,
You
Carol.
shared Monday, Carol, I'm talking to you, Carol. On Monday, Carol shared a beautiful, I don't know if you even remember, about presence and being in the presence of God. And I don't know if you remember, but it was absolutely right on this paragraph. Do you even remember?
When I was going through something really difficult and I thought I couldn't take another step, it was just over the top. And I go, Lord, you need to take this and you can have it, because this is just too much for me. And he said, I will be your strength. You don't have any, because that's what I was saying. I go, Lord, I can't take one more step. This is just too much for me. And then the other day I was thinking, how did I get through that circumstance? And God said, I was your strength. And it's just amazing that he's there for us even when we don't know it. And he's carrying us when we don't know it. I mean, that's how I know God is so real and Jesus Christ is who he said he was. Because when you're in a crazy situation and you have peace in the middle of the storm, that is when I know I don't have to put a face to it, like Pastor says. You don't have to put a face to it. The minute you do, you're not in God's presence. And that is so true. You just accept that God is carrying you and he's right there with you. It's just, words can't describe it. The words cannot describe it when you have God's peace in the middle of chaos. And that's what I think, like when Peter walked on the water, and when you take your eyes off God or the presence of God, that's when you start sinking. But you keep your eyes on the Lord and he'll carry you. So thank you, Pastor. Takes some of us a long time to get it. But
It takes all of us a long time to get it. And even when you think you got it, that's just another concept that is objective and you're thinking about it. It's only when you actually put it into practice. And then it's usually in retrospect. You get through what you got through, Carol, but then you realize later the impact, the importance and the impact of what you actually experienced. And then it starts to make a deeper kind of sense. You know, what you were talking about, I remember thinking the same thing. You know, you feel like you're alone, you're trying to get through something, you get through something, and you think maybe you did it all by yourself. But those of you who have raised children, you know when they're 2 or 3 and they get into the terrible 2s and the 3s and they're starting to exert their first independence from you, right? Because they're starting, their minds have finally gotten to the point where they're starting to see this objectivity and they're so full of themselves and they think they can do this and do that and they're screaming no at you. And you realize, you know, they're thinking that they're all that, but you're changing their diaper and wiping their nose and feeding them and bathing them. And you know, as a parent, you know, they couldn't exist for that much time without you, and yet they don't see it, you know? And that's exactly our position as human beings for our entire lives. We don't see the provision that's going on behind the scenes, and we think that we're doing something besides just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
And Dave, you know, this to me, this is a wonderful venue because for the last 30 years, I've been very content with my walk with God. But since this process of the effect and going through this book and listening to everyone, I feel like now I have this burning desire that I never had. I didn't even know it could exist within me, because I was very neutral most of my life. I was happy if it was a good day, and I was happy if it was a bad day. They were like one and the same. And it's, you know, to describe it now would be like, I would think like the blind guy that now he could see. And he you know, he's trying to explain. He says, well, this is all I know. I couldn't see, but now I can, right? And that's how I feel. Like, it's like, oh, I don't get the details. But, you know, just subtle things like I just heard. And even like, I really want to like go back later and just, this is that desire is I want to like have this image of this soup, right? Because I want to, I know it sounds silly, but it's like, you know, because as soon as I became the ingredient, that's what I realized is that now the love is inside, is that what bonds it all together. And it was like, oh, and earlier today I was talking to Jordana and she was really afraid. Well, I shouldn't say afraid, but she was lonely. And because like her parents are left and she's in the house and I could connect with, no one's around, I feel that loneliness. But as I filled it with this, that loneliness, it's like, oh wait, no, like I'm all connected. I'm in the soup here with everyone. And that gave me a sense of peace. Anyways, thought I'd just share that. Thank you for sharing.
That's great.
Right.
Yeah. So it's a matter of connecting the dots. You know, like I said, everyone's had the experience, whether you're atheist or theist or anything in between. We've had these experiences, but we don't connect them. We don't connect the dots. We don't realize what it is we're really experiencing. And so those dots remain disconnected, and we can look at life more objectively rather than being able to bring it in subject to subject. And then obviously, Tony, you had a desire to want more of your relationship with God, even if it was more at a subconscious level, or you never would have sought out and connected with the effect and stayed with it. So it was there, even though you say, hey, I felt content, I didn't feel like I needed anything. Yeah, you did. And you knew, your spirit knew, and it drew you, and God's spirit is drawing you, and you're accepting that drawing. So yeah, it's all of a piece, but we have to connect the dots, And I suppose what he's really trying to say here is that someone who presents or sees themselves as an atheist hasn't connected those dots, doesn't see how all that connects up. Now, he brings in the last paragraph some interesting terms here. He says the reason that practical atheism and common agnosticism have emerged so broadly today is that we no longer teach people how to be present. Okay, what is a practical atheist? Anybody?
They don't believe there's a God.
Say again?
They don't believe there's a God.
Okay, what's the practical part?
Oh, I don't
Yeah,
know.
because if you have the practical part, so what's the impractical atheist is what I'm saying, right?
Only you, Ellen.
When I think of that, I think of like not acting as if there's a God. So in that case, that would broaden that category quite a bit. But I may not be interpreting that right.
Exactly, you hit it right on the head.
Oh.
Yeah, a practical atheist is someone who lives as if there is no God, even if, and many atheists will say they still believe in some sort of higher power. They don't call it God. It's not going to be the God of the Bible the way that they were taught in Sunday school. It's not that image of a Christian God. But they still believe that there's some sort of higher power. But practically speaking, in their lives, they live as if there is no God at all. So that's a practical atheist. They don't necessarily completely rule out the possibility of God, but they live as if that were true. Okay, so that's a practical atheist. Now, there's another word, it's called apotheism. And apotheism comes from apathy, the connection of apathy, a combination of apathy and theism. And so an apotheist would be someone who has no interest in God, whether God exists or doesn't exist. They see the possibility of God as being irrelevant to their lives. Okay, so you've got a practical atheist who lives as if there is no God. You've got an apotheist who doesn't care one way or another because it's largely irrelevant to their life. But you also have a practical theist, and this is really interesting as well. A practical theist is someone who can express doubt about God's existence, is uncertain about God's existence, but lives practically as if God does exist. Now, you would be surprised how many people fall into that category.
What is that called?
That's just a practical theist. You have a practical atheist who may leave open the possibility of God's existence, but lives as if God does not exist. That can also describe an agnostic, I suppose, to a certain degree as well, right? But a practical theist is the opposite of that. Someone who expresses some doubt and uncertainty of God's existence, but lives as if God does exist. I've had many people, well, I've had several people at the effect come up to me and say, you know what? I still have these doubts. I'm still uncertain. Yeah, I know we can't prove God's existence intellectually and empirically, but they're still living as if God does exist.
Would that be somebody in recovery that talks about a higher power instead of a God?
Well, yeah, I mean, a higher power can obviously be God. Now if we're getting into this silliness where the higher power can be a doorknob, well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, but I mean,
the
there are
higher
people that,
power in 12 steps can be the community, though. The people around you, that's your higher power. But of course, we understand the community as God's hands and feet. We're seeing God working through those people. But the higher power can be, what is the first cause? What started all this? People can still say, hey, there's probably something that started all this, but it really doesn't matter to my day-to-day life. And they live as if that's not true. That would be a practical atheist. You can also have a theist, a church-going person who is trying to understand God, but still has some doubts and uncertainty because we can't prove this thing intellectually to ourselves. And so they living as if God exists, but they still have doubts. Where does any or all of this get resolved? See, it's only in presence that this gets resolved. When you step aside, it's the egoic mind once again. It's our rational consciousness that is creating all of these issues for us. To that mind, God cannot be proven. But when you step outside of that mind and you just experience the presence, the pure presence, and you experience that soupness, right, Tony, of that connection of your presence to God's presence, you know that something deeper is happening here. Now you can rationally in the next moment, just logically wish it away, and you can rationalize it away. But at some level, you know that something happened there. And if you do have a desire for the actual truth and not just that which can be conveniently rationalized, then you'll keep coming back to that place and you'll experience it more and more, and you'll know it deeper and deeper. You'll get more intimately familiar with it. And that is what changes. That's how all of this gets resolved. No, to our rational mind, we cannot prove God's existence. There will always be uncertainty and there will always be some doubt on a rational level. But we can experience God's presence in such a way that convinces us from the spirit up that there's something more to this. And we're a part of it. And it's going to continue after death. And we can live our lives that way. And we can let go of the fear, let go of the anxiety as we start to trust that presence more and more. So all of these issues, whether it's practical atheism, apotheism, practical theism, agnosticism, the only place it resolves, the only place that we can start to be convinced is in pure presence, which means we have to step away from the apparatus of our minds. And that's what contemplation is all about.
So Dave, how do we, I don't know how to say this. To me, there's God and there's Jesus. Is Jesus always present and God is always present?
Everything, I think, is always present all at
Jesus
once.
was a human. He came as a man.
Mm-hmm.
So he's
Well,
the Son of
obviously,
God.
Jesus' humanity is not present to
Right.
us.
And the teachings of Jesus, to me, are the teachings that God gave Jesus, who gave it to us.
Mm-hmm. But the spirit of Jesus is always present to us.
Yes.
Now, the spirit of Jesus is really indistinguishable or one with the Holy Spirit as we understand that concept. But it's all one thing. That's one of the difficulties with the Trinity, that we start to think of it as three separate entities, but it's never been understood that way. But you can't help understanding it that way because we've divided it into three, and so praying to God, praying to Jesus, praying to Spirit, being one with Spirit, it's all the same thing. There is no division. And so, yes, it's always with us, as are the spirits of everyone who's gone before us. And so we are all in the soup together, literally. And even though some are physically present to us and others are not, once we step outside of dualistic thinking, once we step outside of subject-object, we have a sense of that collective presence, that it's all there together. There really, as we said so many times, there really is only one moment. There's only one moment in space, and there's only one place. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. There's only one moment in time, and there's only one place in space. And we're occupying it, the here and the now. Nothing else exists. And so everything that is exists right here and right now, because there's no other place it can possibly be. I've taken this to the nth degree and say, you know what, if that's actually true, and time is really a singularity, it's just one moment, then it doesn't matter when we die, we're all going to pop out on the other side at the same time. So you and me and Moses and Noah and whomever, we're all popping out at the same time, because the linearity of time is an illusion anyway. And so it's all one thing. Now, that can bake your noodle, and you can, if that helps, then fine. If not, then let it go. If it's not soup to you, then let it go. But do your own thought experiment. and take it to the nth degree. What is the radical conclusion of saying everything is one thing? When you step out of dualistic thinking and everything is one thing, what does that really mean? It's crazy radical. And yes, we're all here together at the same time. We're all occupying the same space at the same time. It's just, what are we tuned into, right? And contemplation and centering prayer helps you tune to a different frequency. So we become aware of presence that we weren't aware of before.
Well, that was deep. That's good. I'm blown, I'm blown away just that you picked the practical word out of this sentence, because like I had no idea that was something. It was almost like I need another book here as I'm reading each one of these words, right? Paragraph, oh, explain this is and I even had to look up practical, and I thought, oh wow, because it said here relating to action and practice rather than ideas or thought, right?
Perfect. That's
Right.
beautiful. That hits it
So
right
that-
on the head.
So if I was in contemplation, would that then be considered action and practice?
We need it to be. What does Richard Rohr call his group, right? It's a Center for Action and Contemplation, CAC, because he realizes the two need to be joined together. Because if we're practicing contemplation completely passively, completely without any action, then it's just navel gazing. It doesn't get us anywhere. It has to be actually active. It has to be put into action. It has to be brought from the prayer closet right into the streets and every moment of our lives. If that isn't happening, then we're still not connecting the dots. We're not at all learning the lesson that Jesus is trying to teach us. I mean, he shows us how to do it. He goes to the lonely places to play, right? To pray. But then he brings everything right back, and he's practicing it in every moment, every encounter. And Brother Lawrence picked that up and ran with it and said, yeah, I don't need the prayer closet anymore, because every moment of my life is my prayer closet. All I have to do is practice presence. If that works for you, great. And I was finding it was working for me great for a few years, and now things are getting a little bit more pressurized, and I realized I need to step back and do some centering prayer again, because you find your own balance, but it has to be in action. Absolutely has to be in action.
It's really simple if you just follow along with the words you use there, like Brother Lawrence, right? I'm in there all the time. I'm living in that. The hard part is like, I don't know if the words belief or faith or trust or all of that, hey, that's happening. Like you step into that realm, and it's all of a sudden you realize, so I guess I would say like the Matrix. You ate that pill and you realize, oh, it's like this, not like that.
Mm-hmm. And you brought up, faith and belief, and it's so important for us to realize that the words used there in both the Greek and the Aramaic that are translated as either faith or belief actually have all three meanings of belief, faith, and trust embedded in the understanding of what those words meant originally. And so what you find is that within a single word, you got to process, because belief is just idea. And we can be a practical atheist or a practical theist, either one, because we have one idea that we say God either does exist or doesn't exist, but it's really the faith part, which is the action that tells us what we really do believe. That's why James says, faith without action is dead. It's got to have a praxis. It's got to have a practical part to it. What you do actually tells you what you truly believe, because now you're risking something, you're putting something into practice. And as we do that, as we put it into practice, the things that we say we believe, in other words, we act as if these things are true, then we have the experience of presence. We have the experience of the trustworthiness of God, and that is the trust. Trust is experience. So faith, I believe is idea, faith is action, and trust is experience. And we're trying to get to trust. Trust is where our lives actually change. When we get to trust, then, trust and fear, trust and anxiety and stress, they're inversely proportional. As the trust goes up, all the fear and the anxiety goes down, and our life is experienced completely differently. And you suddenly realize, I can deal with the pressures now. I can deal with the uncertainties now in ways that I never could before. That's because your trust is now up, because you've had an experience of God's trustworthiness. The way that Carol was talking about her experience there. She gets through this difficulty, she gets to the other side, and suddenly she realized she was carried the whole way, and she wasn't necessarily even aware of it at the time. But now she realizes that. You pack on a few more experiences like that, and you're going to find that your trust is increasing, which means that your fear and your anxiety and your stress is decreasing. People always tell me, I trust God. Okay, tell me about your life. Well, they're living in total anxiety. They're taking pills for that. Well, how much do you really trust if your life is experienced as constant anxiety? We're all going to have anxiety from time to time and stress, of course, but is that what characterizes your life? If so, then trust is not present. And so starts with an idea. We're gonna say we believe something, right? We're gonna have mental agreement. But if we don't put it into practice and risk something for the sake of that idea, then we'll never find out whether that idea is really true or not, whether it's trustworthy or not. And if we don't get to trust, our lives don't change.
A few nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night, and I usually get this anxiety that pretty much hits me in the chest, and I can just feel that tightness there. And I try to, like, okay, I'm just not going to think about it. I'm just going to hang in there for a while, and experience the anxiety. And then I get that voice in my head or wherever it comes from, and it says, "Oh, you don't have an anxiety problem." And I thought, well, wait a minute. And then all of a sudden it was like, no, you're feeling the anxiety. What you have is a fear problem. And I thought, oh, it was interesting because as soon as I said that to myself, I felt it go away. And understanding, though, here it is, I don't have fear. There was nothing there to fear. Then I realized that I have these fear thoughts that stir this anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know what I just described, but
what you describe is exactly the classic triage that we need to internally do for ourselves. When you suddenly find yourself triggered by some sort of negative emotion, whether it's just anxiety or whether it's anger or jealousy or whatever it may be, every one of those is going to be triggered by some sort of fear. That's why your question was spot on and the exact question to ask. If you ask yourself, what am I afraid of at this moment? Anger is always a secondary emotion. It's a reaction to something that's deeper, So what is it that you are afraid of? Are you afraid that your agenda is going to be stifled because the car cut in front of you on the freeway and you're reacting with anger? What is the anger coming from? What's the anxiety coming from? The fear that you're not going to be able to perform, the fear that something is going to be taken away from you. What's envy, but the fear that you aren't going to get what somebody else has. What's jealousy but the fear of losing something that you do have to somebody else? It's all about fear. What are you afraid of? If you can ask that question and answer it for yourself, you can have that experience of the release that you're talking about. Because if there's no clear and present danger and there's nothing to fear in the moment, then you know that the anxiety, the stress, the fear is being imported because something has triggered a familiar reflex from way back, can go all the way back to childhood and unresolved issues there. But there's nothing you can do about that in the present, right? Except start to recognize it. So what you experienced was the perfect kind of welcoming practice. If you're all familiar, if any of you are familiar with the welcoming prayer, welcoming practice, you did it, Tony, without even knowing what it was. That's perfect.
Yeah. And it's interesting because of the use of the word practical. I was like a practical, anxious individual. I was just living in that, not even having a clue that it become a friend of mine, and he was going to hang out with me for as long as he could.
So here's the key, though, Tony. You want to make it intentional. You want to make it conscious. You want to actually know what you're doing. It's like being a conscious artist. Sharon knows what I'm talking about here. Anybody might get really inspired and throw the paint on the canvas in just the perfect way, and it looks like some great impressionist painter. But now try to do it again and again and again. The mark of the conscious artist is one who knows his or her craft and the elements that they use to create their work so well that they can have repeatable results. And they don't have to wait for inspiration. They can move into that place because they know their craft. We want to be conscious contemplatives. Now you experienced and you did the exact right thing, but now that you know what it is and what the steps are, now the next time you're triggered, you can actually put yourself through that process and it becomes repeatable and you can bring yourself back. And before you know it, you've got emotional regulation, right? You've got some equilibrium, you've got balance in your life because you can become resilient enough to come back from the usual, pushing around that life is going to do on us. But it's got to be conscious. We have to be intentionally understand what it is we're doing and practice those techniques until they're muscle memory and you don't have to think about them anymore. Someone just said that, they don't have to think about it anymore. Who was that? Oh, it's Sharon, wasn't that you? The presence of God or seeking God is just something that's just part of your DNA now. You don't have to think about it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Dave, your description of the practical theist was very succinct description of me.
Of who?
Of me.
Okay.
And it's, when you told me it's Pascal's wager, that wasn't just right. It wasn't that just in case God exists. It wasn't just, but this is a more succinct description. This is how I've been living for 40 some years of my life. As a kid, you see God as Santa Claus, right? But this is how I've been. That's why I challenge things, and even in my 12 step, I challenge. I don't say it in public, but I challenge it in my journals and notes. But
just
I
know,
couldn't.
just know
I
you're
couldn't
in.
challenge them.
Well,
No,
you're in
because
really good company, right?
oh, thank you.
First of all, and second of all, your task will be to keep stepping out of your right mind and experience presence without any filter in between, because that's where this will resolve. And it's the only place it resolves. And it only resolves in the moment, because the moment that you return to your right mind, now you're thinking objectively again, and you'll rationalize it all away. But every time you return to presence and over time doing it more and more, then the prayer is saying you instead of you saying the prayer. Or as Sharon described it, it's just part of her now. And then that becomes the reality of your life.
So, see, even when you say the right mind, you mean the right side of my brain, or
Oh
the right
no,
mind?
I was doing a silly play on words. Yes, a left-hander are the only ones in your right mind, right? That's what I, since I'm a lefty, so yeah, left-handers are the only ones in their right mind. No, that's a little too literal. I'm just saying to step out of your conscious mind entirely. That's what we need to do, and that's the only place that you'll find resolution. I mean, I can tell you with all sincerity and complete belief, I can't prove God's existence to you. Nobody can. And anybody who says they can is selling something. I'll go that far. We can't logically, empirically prove God's existence, but it doesn't matter to me anymore. I know that because that's my mind trying to control God, to find the edges that I can hang on to name God and control God. I don't need to do that anymore because I've experienced presence enough to trust it enough on a good day at least, that conviction is enough. And the conviction that I have, the convincedness that I have that God is real and cares for me and loves me is what's carrying me through, even though I can't prove it rationally. But that's the deal about death. The rational mind gets left at the headstone. So what the heck continues after that anyway? This is a temporary tool that we're given with the earth suit. It's only good for the amount of time that we're breathing here. So our goal is to step outside of that and experience the little death, experience moments without this apparatus around us so that we can see what's really real and not just through the filter of our illusions. Making sense? Sort of?
Yeah.
It's not as good as soup, but it'll have to do for now.
Yes.
All right, we did good. Well, I think this was good since we just had a few of us this week that we finished last week's work. We didn't break any new ground, but that's okay. We can do that next week, and hopefully more of our folks will be back and they can rejoin us. But this was a really good discussion. I hope it worked for you. I know I
This was
did
a
a lot of talking and I never
section.
like that, but hopefully it was helpful. You
It was
know,
a great section.
yeah, you can
This
kind of
whole
see how
page.
we're circling in more and more on presence and contemplation, and still stripping off layers. Every time we have a conversation like this, I think it strips off a few more layers and we get a clearer view. So, but getting the clear view is only the first of 3 steps, right? We got to put it into practice, and then we can experience the trustworthiness. So remember, the intellectual is the easy part. Yeah. I saw a cartoon that showed a bunch of high school graduates, you know, in their mortarboards and gowns and everything. They're yelling and screaming, and said, "Yeah, congratulate the high school students for getting through the easiest part of life."
Mm. Yeah,
And that's kind of what we do when we finally get some clarity and the light bulb goes on over our head and we finally understand what this is all about. Congratulations, you just got through the easy part. All right, let's end it there. I know, Tony, you've been becoming our prayer meister. Would you like to pray us, close us in prayer as well? Again, today? No?
absolutely.
Go for it.
Yes. Oh, Lord. I am thankful, Lord, that God is good, that you are good and you're good to all of us. And Lord, I know in our hearts, we all want to be good back, Lord. We want to be in your good grace, and just us showing up and being present, Lord, is 99.9% of that. So thank you for this session. Thank you for this week, and look forward to discussing some more about you. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
You have
everybody.
a great rest of the week, and we'll see you on Sunday.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Good night, good night, good night. Good night, Sarah. Good night, William.
Good night.
Hey, you're still there. Are you out of your car yet?
Yeah, I'm up with my sisters here, doing
Good
some
deal,
dog
man.
sitting.
Thanks for
Alright.
being with us, even though you were on the move.
Yeah, in spirit. All right.
Okay, buddy. See you soon.
All right. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.